In the previous video, we looked at how apex predators such as the peregrine falcon are disproportionately harmed through the biomagnification of harmful toxins like heavy metals and persistent organic pollutants such as DDT. Similarly, we can take a look at the disastrous consequences of removing another apex predator from an ecosystem that we can't see in Canada. We are going to go all the way to the Amazon rainforest, at least in spirit, to take a look at what happens when we disrupt their apex predator, which is this big cat here that we call the jaguar. So the jaguar is of particular ecological importance because it feeds on not one, not two, not even three, but 87 other species of animals within the Amazon rainforest, many of which, for example, the crocodiles that are found in the Amazon River, many of these organisms do not have any other predator than the jaguar, which makes jaguars especially important at controlling the lesser or lower consumer populations and preventing them from getting too large. Unfortunately, human activities both historically and currently threaten the jaguar's very survival. So one of the big human activities that threatened the jaguar in past is the process of overhunting, both for the jaguar skins as trophies by sport hunters, and also overhunting them by farmers in order to protect their domestic animals like cows and pigs that they keep on their farms. Currently, though, if you've heard news that the Amazon rainforest is on fire, that's because the government of Brazil recently opened up the Amazon rainforest to slash and burn agriculture, where farmers could basically set the Amazon rainforest on fire and cut down large amounts of rainforest land, often hundreds of kilometers at a time, to make room for industrial farming. And obviously this leads to the process of deforestation, which again, since the jaguar lives here, this is destroying the jaguar's habitat, which either kills them because they now have a lack of shelter or forces them to run away to other more isolated areas. So both the process of overhunting and extreme deforestation have pushed the jaguar to the brink of extinction. Now let's say, unfortunately, that the jaguar doesn't make it. What consequences would we see with the rest of its ecosystem? Well, since the jaguar naturally controls a lot of the herbivore populations, those populations with no apex predator to keep them under control are going to increase because there's nothing to hunt them, which means that they will be able to go around the Amazon rainforest and eat to their heart's content without any danger of being killed by a predator. Now, the larger the herbivore populations are, the more producers, that being plants, are needed in order to sustain these populations, and more herbivores means that more plants are going to get eaten, meaning that the producer population we would expect to decrease over time. Now, if there is no apex predator to keep the herbivore populations under control, there's nothing to stop them from eating most of the plants or producers within the Amazon rainforest. And if there are no longer any producers, then the herbivores will no longer be able to eat. And if there are no herbivores left, the mid-level carnivores will also not have any prey to hunt, leading to an entire ecosystem collapse. All because of the removal of a single species that just happened to be the apex predator. So because of its important role in regulating so many other populations within the Amazon rainforest, the jaguar is known as a keystone species, and many human activities such as overhunting and deforestation threaten many keystone species, including the jaguar and many of those found in other ecosystems. However, as we'll take a look at in our final example of anthropogenic climate change, oftentimes adding an organism to an ecosystem can cause just as much damage as removing one that is critical. So if we take a look at this ecosystem here, which is a typical boreal forest, North BC, Northern Ontario type of ecosystem, all of the organisms that naturally exist within that ecosystem without human interference are called the native species of that ecosystem. So if an organism is not native, it is considered a non-native, or the more technical term is an introduced species. And we'll take a look at how one little beetle can disrupt the entire ecosystem here. So because these populations coexist with each other, as we looked at from the jaguar, the job of apex predators ecologically is to keep the herbivore and mid-level carnivore populations under control, and especially to prevent the herbivore population from eating too many of the producers. And if the producers were gone, we saw that eventually the ecosystem would collapse. So each level, each trophic level of the ecosystem's job is to keep the other levels relatively stable and prevent any one population from growing too dominantly. When each trophic level is able to keep each of the other trophic levels stable, the ecosystem is considered to be in equilibrium, or simply that the ecosystem is balanced. However, many human activities, many of which we don't think as impacting ecosystems at all, one such activity is travel, another of which being international trade, and a third of which being human migration, that being humans from one part of the world moving to another part of the world, may have drastically unintended consequences. And one of those unintended introductions of a non-native species to Canada is this beetle here called the emerald ash borer. This beetle is originally found and can still be found in Eastern Asia, specifically northern China, East Russia, and the northern boreal forests of Japan. Normally, in its home environment, the emerald ash borer is a decomposer organism, or a detritivore more specifically, because it feeds on the dead wood of pine and spruce trees found in the northern parts of these countries, and therefore has a very important role in recycling biomass, allowing trees to be broken down and their nutrients to enter the soil. However, the emerald ash borer was brought to Western Canada through international trade when some emerald ash borer beetles entered into wooden shipping crates that were transported into British Columbia. Now, the problem is that the emerald ash borer is outside of its normal ecosystem, which means that it needs to survive in ways that it would not normally do. So in Canada, the emerald ash borer eats the inside of trees, including the living parts, and this is very deadly for the trees because the living parts of the inside of trees contain all of the nutrients that they need to grow and all of the water that they need to use to transport substances within the tree. And eventually, this is going to kill the tree due to starvation and dehydration because of a lack of water, and we can see the catastrophic results that it has here. Now, the problem with introduced species like the emerald ash borer, because this organism is not natively found within the ecosystem, organisms that would normally eat a small insect like this don't recognize what this is. They don't know if it's poisonous. They don't know if it's safe to eat. So for now, the emerald ash borer has no predators, which means that there is nothing to keep this population under control. Now, because it has no predators, it is able to reproduce at a much faster rate than other organisms are, and therefore, because it can get its population up to very, very, very high numbers, that means that it is also able to outcompete other organisms in order to find food, thereby depriving the native species of their potential food source. Now, if we were to let the emerald ash borer continue to reproduce, what is this going to do to the tree populations in northern Canada? Well, obviously, if it continues to kill these trees before they can reproduce, we would expect the producer population to decrease significantly. And if this continues for all trees within a forest ecosystem, this can once again lead to an ecosystem collapse. If all the producers are now gone, that means that there is nothing for the herbivore organisms to eat, causing them to die off, meaning that there is nothing for any of the predator organisms that feed on the herbivores to eat, eventually causing them to die off as well. So here we can see this example of an introduced species causing nearly the same effects, albeit for different reasons, as the removal of an apex predator. And for that reason, organisms like the emerald ash borer are what we call invasive species, because they are effectively treated as an invader, as they have no predators and minimal competition for their food, and their existence threatens the very stability of the ecosystem that they are invading. This concludes our series of videos on anthropogenic climate changes. If you want to test your knowledge of anthropogenic climate changes and their effects on ecosystems, you can read in more detail about 3 invasive species to various countries around the world and how these invasive species can cause unintended consequences to the ecosystems of which they are invading.